Hi, Douglas.
Hey, Sasha, how are you?
I'm really, really happy to have you with me today so that Independent Biennial in Slovenia can hear a bit more about you. Where are you at the moment?
I am currently in Stockholm, Sweden.
Well,
It's very sunny and really warm. It is not. It's so cold.
Welcome to Sweden. So I will just go straight into our questions because our talk is very short. I'm very intrigued by your life that is deeply embedded with different parts of the world, because it seems that you are working a lot and producing amazing art while traveling. Is it every 2 years that you move, or how does it work? Where did your journey actually started?
Yes, the short answer is around every 2 years. I tend to move, and that's not necessarily planned. It actually is actually random, but it's just a great coincidence. Something that I've noticed, and thinking back to what's happened is that roughly every 2 years. Like for example, right now, before arriving here in Sweden, I was in Bali, and I was there right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it is coming up on 2 years that I was actually there. I used to say I was stuck there, but somehow the idea of being stuck is a negative thing. But in fact, being in Bali was the perfect time for me to be there during the pandemic, and it was really helpful for my both creative process, but personal growth and a whole lot of things. And before then, I was in Bangkok, roughly for 2.5 years, and then before then, I was in Japan for also around 2 years. So it fluctuates a little bit, but that's and then I was in Hawaii before then, and then before then, I was in New York. And this whole 2 year travel thing really started, like a lot of great things in my life. It all started from some kind of an accident or some misstep. I was a few years ago, well, now like 7 or 8 years ago, I was married, and I ended up going to Japan, basically on a long extended vacation. And while I was there, I met, we were supposed to go to Nara Prefecture, Nara City, to go for basically a vacation to meet some friends. And we ended up, by accident, choosing a place through Airbnb that was in Nara Prefecture. But the place where we chose was an hour and a half from where we should have been. And it turned out that this person who had this Airbnb was an artist. And on my second trip there, I completely fell in love with the place and fell in love with him and his wife. And one day he just woke me up at 5 a.m. and gave me paper and pen and a pencil and said, "Start drawing." And that was the beginning of this journey into art in a kind of very serious way. I did that for 5 days continuously, waking up at 5 a.m, and then I was entirely addicted to it. And then for the rest of the trip through Japan, but also for the rest of that year, everywhere I went, all I did was wake up at 5 a.m. and then just start painting and drawing. Even when I was traveling for work, at the time I was doing consultancy for a kind of research and development company in Tokyo. So it was a super exciting time because I was discovering this world of art, and I was also discovering this kind of inner personal development world. And having such a rigorous practice around art making was incredibly useful. And then shortly after that, I quit and ended up living in Hawaii for a bit. It was about 1.5 years in Hawaii, and I just continued to draw until I moved to Japan. And there is when the kind of practice really started to grow, largely because I was being mentored, but also because I quit my job, I quit everything. I ended up getting divorced and found myself with a lot of times on my hand and being in Japan. So I think the isolation of traveling that sometimes happens, especially when you travel to cultures that are very different from your own, or even the language, it gave me this kind of isolation, or I guess a better word is insulation, where I can then really focus on my practice. And then I just, that's all I ever wanted to do, and that's still all I want to do. And so it was just a wonderful kind of way to begin. And Japan is a very supportive environment for the arts, because there's so much appreciation for the arts. And it's considered, I mean, there's just a kind of high esteem and high regards for people who make art, right? I mean, we kind of see that as examples in crafts, or music, in theater, and all these kind of different things, where everything is considered elevated if you take it to an art form. So making swords, making paper, clothing, anything that gets refined to a certain level moves away from a craft or design, and then it goes into an art practice. So that was the beginning of that journey.
That's amazing that you found it in Japan, where you, as you said, it was a different language, an insulation part of your travel. So, how could you relate to other places? What for you where would you call yourself home?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I thought I was going to end up in Japan. And it was actually my shisho, which is a Japanese word for master. And a master, different than a sensei, is a teacher, and then a shisho is a master. And the master is somebody who helps you understand the greater things of your practice, right? So a teacher kind of teaches you very kind of basic techniques kind of thing. So one day I was all set to, really kind of anchor down in Japan. And he looked at me and said, Japan will always be your home, but it's very important that you don't disconnect from the world, and that you really understand your place in the world. So he literally said to me, you belong to the world. And I really had to think very deeply about that. But I quickly realized that what he meant by it is this kind of exchange that happens, how much I am fed through inspiration and through meeting people and through discovering things, but also then what you give back, right? And so this idea of belonging to the world is this kind of two-way street. And so from there, I moved to Thailand, which was just more incidental because I have friends in Thailand. And then geographically, the proximity to Japan was very easy. So then I ended up having exhibitions, and it became very feasible to live in Thailand. And from there, Southeast Asia is really kind of the backyard. So I was able to go to Jakarta, to Singapore, and all while doing exhibitions, and travel within Thailand as well. And what I discovered is that there's that every time you engage in a different place, there's this kind of exchange that happens. And it's, I guess people often describe me as nomadic, while I tend to think of it as, how do you relate? In other words, how can you be everywhere and then nowhere? And what is the relationship between those things, right? Like, so if you don't belong to one place, but you belong to all the places, then for me, there's a kind of a greater resonance, because it's not to say that I just love Japanese culture, that I love Thai culture, or the people, but it's that you love people, right? You love humanity. And I think that having the journeys that I've been on has helped me kind of reach this level of a global understanding of thinking about things holistically. So ultimately is thinking about humanity. It's thinking about the entire planet as one system where nature, humans, everything is all integrated, rather than singularities or individuality, either of a country, of a person, or anything of the sort. And that has really affected my art, largely because art can be a very introspective practice where you're always reflecting on yourself. And what I've started to do through my art is to ask, yes, those very deep personal questions, but not so much as a way of identifying Douglas, in quotations, but to think of me as, for example, a single touching point of a human experience. So I often focus in my work on things that relate to me and that are very powerful, but that really might resonate with somebody else because they also might have had that experience. So, for example, when I do projects recently focusing on grief, I've been thinking and doing a lot of work on what does it mean to lose loved ones? What does it mean to mourn a past life? And that's something that both tragically happened in my life right before the pandemic. But what was interesting is to see how that sense of loss occurred globally, and not just people passing away either through the coronavirus or anything of the sort, but the kinds of liberties, the thinking, all these things that we began to experience because of the lack of movement or the loss of that movement, the loss of freedom that we all experience to some levels with lockdowns and so forth. So this, what I began to quickly recognize was that the entire world was mourning because we were actually transforming and shifting. And that's the beauty of the things that I like in my work, is that the work itself is just a catalyst for going deeper into thinking and experiencing certain aspects of life. So it's less about the actual object or the artifact that is made, in my case is a painting or a drawing, but more of the ways that it invites us to kind of reflect and go deeper. And so, so the work itself has become a reflection of this journey and this travel, but not just the journey of moving from place to place, but the journey of also going deeper into bigger questions. And the questions, once again, are not just about me, but they're about the human experience. And what does it mean to be alive today? What does it mean to live with others, to share and experience things with other people, with nature, your own histories? So currently, I have an exhibition up. It's an online exhibition that addresses the issues of histories. And the title is Memorias. And I chose the title in Spanish because in Spanish, unlike the English word memory, which is neutral, in Spanish, memorias is a feminine. And femininity being the anchor base of creativity, I try to think of histories and memories specifically as a creative practice. In other words, that creativity that we use to reconstruct a thought of what happened in the past and how we reconstruct our own identities, how we construct and create memories and narratives that then inform the way that we not only look back, but also understand the present moment. So it might seem like a reach, but what I was interested in is this idea of creativity as a way to change the narrative around memories and histories, things that we often think are solid, right? Very specifically, like when we think about buildings that are monuments to the past, sculptures or anything that we create, we tend to think of them as physical objects that don't move. But in fact, it's our memories that are shifting the way that we understand and relate to these things. In most cases, right, like a more dramatic case of that is when people have, amnesia or selective memory. When we don't want to deal with certain things in the past, right, we can be in denial about it. But those are very kind of extreme examples. In more proactive ways, I think these memories are the way that you can retell a story to yourself to say, oh, yeah, that wasn't so bad. I actually kind of enjoy that. I didn't realize that I enjoyed it so much. And through that lens, we can change the way that we perceive our lived experiences. And so that's something that occurred not only because I was traveling and going to different places. I kind of came up with this as I was walking through Milan, which is a city kind of very rich in architecture and history, and realizing the fluidity of those moments. But it also reflects the journey of where I'm going as a person as well. And, and then all these things like the fluidity of narratives and construction of identity is something that we're seeing largely in society today with a rise in discussing, because I think it's always been there, but it's now becoming much more acceptable to discuss the fluidities of gender, of personas and who we are, right? And people are getting more agency through that. And I think all of this is a creative practice.
Maybe we are more open to the whole idea of a change more than before the pandemic, probably.
Exactly. No, I just really quickly on that. I think what we're seeing, however, you conceptualize what happens with the pandemic, one thing that has happened is that it's forced us to make certain amount of transformation, and these transformations are global, right? Unfortunately for some people have been extremely painful at a personal level, but is an incredibly unique moment in history where we are seeing massive amounts of transformation, and they're operating at every single level. And
in a very short period of time.
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of fascinating to think about like what you said, how quickly it happened in a short amount of time, right? There's been so much transformation. And, of course, people always, transformation is never a pleasant thing. But usually what we transform into, I often tend to think of as a much better version of things. So,
if I can go back to the time in Japan when you were meeting with your master, and what does he think of the Douglas today? There has been some time passed, and you went through your personal transformation. How does he perceive Douglas today?
That's a great question, because I, even though I'm physically not in the same shared studio, I still show him my work and we still have conversations. So we pretty much check in with each other over the last every like month or so. And it's super fascinating to see a certain amount of kind of parallel development. He thinks of my work as deepening, and at the same time as trying to continue to grow, right? To continue to always push. And that's something that I'm, if I can say, with a lot of modesty, but I'm very proud of that, because it's very easy to find things that work and then stick with that. What's hard to do is to always shift, because when you're shifting, you're moving into the unknown, and that transformation can be quite challenging. And it's a huge testament to the principles that he instilled in me, which is to always be authentic and to keep pushing, right? To kind of challenge the boundaries of things. And so I think, I haven't asked him the question directly, what he necessarily thinks of my work, but from his feedback, I think he recognizes the kind of change and the evolution of the work. And like I said before, because of things like the work on grief and what's happened, there's a certain amount of depth that is occurring because the topics are getting heavier, if you will. So I'm trying to think back to his last feedback of one of the pieces that I showed him, and there's a certain level of maturity in that, both visually, right, from what the aesthetic and the form and if you will, the kind of artistic practice, but then also the energy and the emotional response to the work itself.
These are such an interesting topics. I wish we had an hour or more. I just need to ask you one more question before we say goodbye, and that is,
Okay.
what is next? What comes next for you?
Well, it's a great question because literally I'm at the edge of one chapter of this kind of 2-year thing, and then about to begin the next one. And I must confess that it is incredibly scary, because when I make these transformations and these changes, I don't necessarily plan what happens. I just follow my gut. And to move from Bali to Stockholm is probably the biggest shift that one can think of, not only weather-wise, but culturally. And so I was actually thinking about this yesterday, because as I was walking around, I realized that I am all the experience of having done shows in all different parts of the world, and having studios that I know I can go back into and just fit right back into those same shoes, that I found myself choosing the unknown and about to engage in a country where I don't speak the language, where, it's absolutely 100% opposite of what I would have ever chosen. It's not sunny. It's not warm. There's water, but there's not like a surfing spot. And yet I was standing there yesterday and super excited about the new possibilities, largely because it is unknown, largely because I will have to reinvent myself. And in that process, both discover something about myself as much as discover a new place. So it is quite exciting. If I had to guess, I would say that, the winter is a time for a lot of stillness and reflection. So I'm hoping that what comes from this is kind of the ability to go deeper into stillness as a practice. But that's just me being incredibly superficial at this moment, because I don't really know what will happen. So exciting.
Thank you so much, Douglas, for your time. I would just add something that one of my professors in Helsinki years ago when I was studying said to me, anti-Ekron, he said, why should I refuse an opportunity to start all over again? So I guess this sentence really fits to, your new exploration into the unknown. So I wish you all the best, and good luck with your new stillness up north. And I hope that one day we will see you in Slovenia.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you so much. I'm going to take that as an invitation.
Yes.
So I would love to do that. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Douglas. Bye.
Thank you, Sasha. Bye.